I saw this sign the other day and it made me laugh. Look good. Can you figure out why? For some reason, it's adding everything up, even though there are different quantities. The first speaks about population, right? And the second refers to the height, and the third to the year. But they just all added them together on the sign. Was that the right thing to do? No. Because you can't add years to height nor to an amount of people. We can only compare measurements that are using the same units. That is true even when we have the same quantities. For example, if I measured length in meters, then in comparing it to another length, I would also have to use it in meters. In the same way that choosing the right unit matters for quantity, I have to choose the right instrument in taking my measurements too. Can you imagine what it would be like if I used a very small ruler to try and measure the height of this town above sea level? It would probably take forever. We have to use the right tool when measuring quantities. Hi, my name is Mr. Mac, and in this lesson, we are going to talk about the appropriate instruments to use when taking measurements. We are going to discuss 5 different things that we can measure and the right tools to measure them. While we discuss the different things that we can measure, think about where you're going to make these measurements. Secondly, I want you to think about a benchmark measurement for each tool. That means you should have an idea of which tool to use when measuring something that looks like it will be some centimeters long or some kilometers long. Finally, keep in mind the mistakes that you could possibly make when using these instruments and how to avoid them. In this video, you're not just going to be listening. At some points, I'm going to ask you to tell me what you think. That is when you will see this thinking emoji pop up. I'll also give you activities to do. Then you will see an exercise emoji pop up because it's going to be time to exercise your brain muscles. So, let's get started. First, let's talk about measuring lengths. Length is the distance from one point to another. There are different ways we can measure length. We can use inches and feet, which are part of the imperial system commonly used in the USA, or we can use metric units that are used worldwide. For the rest of this lesson, we will stick to measuring with metric units. Here are some common units of length that you would have most likely seen before. A meter is roughly the length of an adult male from his hip to the ground, or the same length as a guitar if you've ever played with one. 1,000 millimeters is the same length as 1 meter. The prefix milli means 1,000th. So a millimeter really means 1,000th of a meter. A $10 coin is about 1 millimeter thick. A scientist may measure a very small specimen in millimeters. 100 centimeters is the same length as a meter. The width of a crayon or pencil is usually 1 centimeter. 1,000 meters is the same length as 1 kilometer, which makes sense because the prefix kilo means 1,000. A kilometer is the distance covered after walking at a normal pace for roughly 15 minutes. Here's a quick question. I want you to take a minute, look around, and find 3 things that you would like to measure, either inside your house or outside. What did you think of? You may be thinking of something taller than you, like the height of your door. Or you may be thinking of something that you can hold in your hand, like your phone. Or better yet, you may be thinking of something really long, like the distance from your house to school, if you live that far away. Now, we have an idea of what units we would use to measure each of these, but how would you measure each? What tool would be best? Here are some common tools used to measure length. They're not the only ones, but they cover a wide range of lengths. Let's start by looking at one you are very familiar with and you probably see every day. You probably have it in your school bag right now. Do you know which one I'm talking about? Yes, your ruler. A ruler is the most common tool used to measure length. There are different types of rulers. Smaller rulers that measure lengths up to 15 centimeters can be found in geometry sets. They are the best used for straight lengths measured in millimeters and centimeters. Some rulers can measure up to 1 meter. Some are even foldable and can measure up to 3 meters when extended fully. These rulers are best used to measure lengths such as the distance between objects in a building or a room. Here are 2 things to remember whenever we use a ruler. 1. We are counting the spaces between the ticks and not the ticks themselves. And 2, we can count from any part of the ruler. We don't always have to start at 0. If you look at this line, for example, its length is 1, 2, 3, 4 centimeters. It starts at 3 centimeters and ends at 7 centimeters, so it must be 4 centimeters. Can you think of somewhere else that we may use a ruler? Students use them at school to make measurements in their books. Tailors and dressmakers may also use them to make precise measurements when making clothes. Another type of measuring instrument is a tape measure. A tape measure is a type of flexible ruler. They are among the most common measuring tools used today. Some tape measures are a stiff metallic material called the ribbon that can stiffen when needed, but can also roll up for simple use and storage. This is the tape measure that carpenters and other persons on a construction site often use. Another type of tape measure, one we call the measuring tape, is much more flexible and used by dressmakers and tailors. It has 2 sides, one that measures in inches and feet, while the other measures in centimeters to meters. Here's a picture of the sides measured in inches and feet. The distance in red from one long demarcation to the other shows 1 inch. The inch is then split into smaller units, 32 to be exact. In red, you'll notice that mark of half an inch. Then to the sides, smaller measurements of 1/4 of an inch and 3/4 of an inch. And it keeps getting smaller for more precise measurements. Here's another picture with the size measured in meters and centimeters. The longer ticks are labeled as centimeter demarcations, while the smaller ones are millimeter demarcations. It's read in the same way that we read a ruler. For example, you notice that at 1 centimeter, it's 1 long tick, while at 41 millimeters, it's 1 millimeter after the 4 centimeter mark. To use it successfully, we have to remember that 1 centimeter is equal to 10 millimeters in length. Some tape measures go from 1 to 100 centimeters and start over after the 1 meter mark. Others repeat after every 10 units. That is, instead of having 11 on the tape measure, it would stop at 10 centimeters and start at 1 again. We use a tape measure pretty much the same way we use a ruler. First, we put the end of the tape measure at one end of the item or space that we want to measure. When we get to the end of the object being measured, then we take the reading. Because a measuring tape is flexible, it's best used to measure the distance around circular and irregular objects. The tape measure, on the other hand, is best used where we need a flexible but sturdy measuring tool. It is perfect for a construction site. What about distances that aren't so easy to measure in meters, like kilometers? For that, we can use a measuring, or what we call the trundle wheel. The trundle wheel is basically a stick on a wheel that we push or pull alongside us to measure distance. To use it, first, make sure the wheel surface is clean. Dirt can affect the wheel's rotation. Second, place the tool exactly where the measurement starts. Third, keep a steady pace while you walk because changing pace can affect the wheel's rotation. Fourth, when you reach your endpoint, pick your trundle wheel up. Finally, take your measurement from the wheel by reading it off the scale. Some chunder wheels will have digital scales, while others like these have an analog scale. It is more accurate on flat surfaces. Can you think of the best time to use a chunder wheel? It's best used to cover the distance of roads, survey the perimeter of a plot of land to build a fence, or for other similar long distances. Here's an activity for you. Now that we have explored the different instruments we can use to measure length, let us go back to the items we found earlier. What tool would you use to measure these lengths? Well, when we spoke about the height of the door, it seems that a meter rule or a tape measure would be best. For the length of the side of your phone, you may have thought of using a small ruler. And for the distance from your home to school, a chunder wheel would be best. These are some appropriate tools to measure length. Here's another quantity that we can measure. The more of it you have in your food, the happier you'll be. Well, I think. Yeah, I'm thinking about mass. Mass tells us how heavy an object is. Mass can be measured in pounds and ounces, or in metric units of kilograms and grams. How much do you think a kilogram weighs? Or a gram? Well, this chart shows some common metric units of mass. A centigram is 1/100th of a gram. It has a very small mass, almost as if you can't even feel it. A raindrop would weigh 1 centigram. A gram feels very light. A paperclip weighs 1 gram. A smartphone could probably weigh between 100 to 200 grams. A kilogram is 1,000 grams. It is the base unit for mass. It is also the same as 2.2 pounds. A liter of water typically will weigh 1 kilogram. And finally, a ton is 1,000 kilograms, and that is very heavy. I don't think you'll be able to lift that up on your own. A small car usually weighs a ton. Here's a question though. Can you think of 3 places where you would need to weigh something? You may be thinking of weighing cooking ingredients in the kitchen to bake a cake or cook some Sunday dinner. Or you may be thinking about carrying out experiments in science class. You may need to make precise measurements for your experiment. Some might even be thinking about weighing themselves in the bathroom or at the doctor's office. Now, there are a lot of instruments that we can use to weigh, but let us look at 2 for the situations we just mentioned: the kitchen scale and the bathroom scale. I am sure that you have seen a kitchen scale at some point in time before. I can bet one is in your kitchen right now. It is the device used to weigh the mass of ingredients. A kitchen scale can be either analog or digital, just like a watch. If you are using an analog scale, the first thing you have to do is set it to 0. If you're using a digital scale, most times the instructions will accompany it, telling you how to calibrate the scale, that is, how to set it to 0. A kitchen scale can weigh either in pounds or in kilograms. For a scale whose units are in pounds, it usually has larger demarcations that represent pounds and smaller tick marks for ounces. 1 pound has 16 ounces, so for each pound you will see 16 ticks for ounces in between. For example, on this scale, this mark is 8 ounces or half of a pound. The next mark is 1 pound and 4 ounces or 1¼ pounds, since 4 ounces take up a quarter of that measure for pounds. If we think about it too, 4 ounces is 4/16 of a pound, and that can be written as 1/4 pound. For a scale whose units are in kilograms, it has its kilograms as larger tick marks and 100-gram increments. Since it is a metric unit, it's read in the same way other metric measurements are read. That is, 1,000 grams is equal to 1 kilogram. Most times though, you won't find them separate. You'll find both kilogram and pound units on the same scale. You'll see a kitchen scale in the home and even in the market too, because vendors use it to weigh food. A digital scale is much more versatile. Because it is so precise, it can be used to weigh smaller masses. You're more likely to find a digital scale in a supermarket weighing fresh produce or things that are paid for by kilogram or pound. So, a kitchen scale is great for the kitchen, but it's probably not the best thing for the bathroom, the room we're moving into next. Choosing the right instrument is very important when dealing with mass. For example, when we use an inappropriate tool in length, it takes us a really long time to complete our measurements. But if we use the wrong instrument when dealing with mass, if it's too heavy, we could destroy our instrument, and we would not want that. A bathroom scale works just like a kitchen scale. It can represent measurements in pounds or kilograms, and it can either be analog or digital. The bathroom scale is similar to the scale found in the doctor's office, but the main difference is that most times those scales weigh using a balancing mechanism. It is best used to weigh a person's mass. Now, here's an activity for you. Look at these two items, a pill and some ground provisions that you would find being sold in the market. Which instrument would you use to weigh each? For the pill, you already know that this is a very small item. Therefore, a digital scale would be the best since it is very precise. For the ground provisions, it's something we would find in the market and probably weigh a few kilograms. Thus, a kitchen scale would be the best to use. So far, we have discussed appropriate instruments for length and mass. Now, let us look at an appropriate instrument for temperature. There is mainly one instrument we use to measure temperature, but let us quickly talk about what temperature is. Temperature tells us how hot or cold something is. Temperatures can range from negative to positive values. A negative temperature tells us that something is really cold. Temperature can be measured in either degrees Celsius or degrees Fahrenheit. On a thermometer, it can have Fahrenheit on one side and Celsius on the other. A temperature of 100 degrees Celsius is very hot. That is the temperature water boils at. A temperature of 0 degrees Celsius is very cold. It's the temperature that water freezes at. A temperature of around 30 degrees Celsius is summer-like weather. Those are the temperatures we experience all year round in Jamaica. The human body has an average temperature of 37.5 degrees Celsius. So that's just an idea of some different temperatures that we experience on a daily basis. Now, we can use a thermometer to measure temperature. There are different types of thermometers. A mercury thermometer uses mercury to measure temperature. When temperature changes, mercury expands or contracts, and we can use that to measure the temperature. This was the first type of thermometer to be used. In more modern times, we use digital thermometers. Some are infrared thermometers, and they can be used to measure bodily temperature at a distance. This is especially useful when measuring the temperature of a person who may have a contagious illness. An oral thermometer can also be digital. To take somebody's temperature using this thermometer, we place it under their tongue. We can mount a wall thermometer to measure the temperature in a room. Thermometers are found everywhere, in cars, air conditioning units, and sometimes even in our smartphones. We can download thermometer apps that use the built-in temperature sensors on our phone to measure the temperature around us. Here's a question for you. What do you think the appropriate instrument would be to measure the temperature of a cup of tea? Did any of you say a tea thermometer? You're not wrong. Yes, that exists. Did you know that? I definitely did not know they had that. But we could use a digital thermometer as well. What about checking out if a family member has a fever? We could use an oral thermometer. What if we wanted to find out how cold our room is? Then we could use our room thermometer or our smartphone by using a thermometer app. The final set of quantities that we are going to measure are volume and capacity. In a sense, they both measure the size of three-dimensional objects. We can measure capacity or volume using liters to measure liquid or cubic centimeters to measure the volume of solid objects. We can also relate both units. 1 liter is equal to 1,000 cubic centimeters. On the other hand, 1 cubic centimeter is equal to 1 milliliter, since it is 1,000th of a liter. But here is the question that we have to ask. What is the difference between capacity and volume? Capacity tells us the amount that something can hold. For example, this container has a capacity of 200 milliliters because it can hold up to 200 milliliters of liquid. On the other hand, volume is the amount of space that something takes up. If we were to pour some water into our container, now we could say the volume of water in the container is 150 milliliters based on this picture that we have. The container has the capacity to hold 200 milliliters, but right now it is actually holding a volume of 150 milliliters of water. Volume could also refer to the amount of space that a solid object takes up. A liter is typically the size of a tall water bottle or 4 glasses of water. A milliliter is very small. It would take up only just a quarter of a teaspoon, just the smallest little part at the bottom. Whereas we can use a ruler to measure any length or a thermometer to measure any temperature, there is no widely available tool to measure volume. The volume of an object can change depending on the size of its cross-sectional area and its depth. That means the wider the base or the taller the object, the greater its volume. Here's a quick question. Can you think of 3 volumes that you could measure? You may be thinking of a small measure, such as liquid medicine, or you may have thought of a slightly greater amount of liquid, like a bottle of juice. Or some of you may have thought of something solid, like a tennis ball. We are able to use instruments to measure each of these. A medicine cup is used to share out liquid measures of medicine. You can find a medicine cup in the doctor's office or in somebody's cupboard. There are small cups that usually have a capacity of 25 to 30 milliliters. To use a medicine cup, we simply pour out the liquid and take note of where it stops. Make sure that you're viewing it at eye level to get the correct measurement. It is best used to take the measurements of small amounts of liquid. A 1 liter jug is another thing that we can use to measure the volume of liquids. It has a capacity of 1 liter. You have most likely seen a jug before in your house or at a restaurant, without the marks for milliliters and liters. Now, I know you might be thinking that we don't really need a 1 liter jug for drinks we buy at the supermarket, since it usually tells us the amount of drink in the bottle on the label. However, most times, people use a 1 liter jug when sharing out large quantities of drink for parties, at a restaurant, or for a family dinner. For example, if I bought a 2 liter bottle of soda and I wanted to share it equally among 8 people at a party, then each person would get that 2,000 milliliters divided by 8, which would be 250 milliliters of juice. I could use my 1 liter jug to precisely measure 250 milliliters of juice each time so that everyone gets the same amount. A measuring beaker is another instrument we can use to measure liquids. Its capacity can range from 100 milliliters to 5 liters or even more. It is often found in a science lab, and we can use it to precisely measure the volume of solids or liquids. If measuring the volume of a liquid, we read it in the same way we read the volume of a cup of medicine. We put it at eye level and read the correct measurement. We can use it to measure the volume of irregularly shaped solid objects as well by something called displacement. Basically, what we do is first fill a beaker with water and take note of the amount. In this case, I filled it initially with 25 milliliters. Next, put a solid object in the water. Make sure the water doesn't overflow and that the object is completely submerged in the water. I'm going to put a stone in my beaker. Then, we would measure the new volume of water. Here, it is now 75 milliliters. Subtract the old volume of water from the new volume of water to get the volume of the irregular object. Here, it would be 75 milliliters minus 25 milliliters, which would be 50 milliliters. This means the volume of the stone is 50 milliliters because it displaced 50 milliliters of water. Of how to measure the basic idea of how to measure the volume of an irregularly shaped object. So let us revisit our slide earlier and see which of these instruments we would choose to measure with. To measure liquid medicine, we could use the measuring cup. A measuring cup is good for measuring small quantities under 50 milliliters. To measure out our bottles of juice, we could use a 1 liter jug. Finally, to measure the volume of our tennis ball, we could measure the displacement in our measuring beaker. We could even displace it in our 1 liter jug if we wanted to. Pause. Wow. We have looked at a lot of instruments. Let us do a quick review. Can you list an item you would use to measure the distance from your home to the nearest beach? Well, if you live really close and could use a meter rule, then good for you. But if you live a little further away from the beach like me, a chunder wheel would be the best tool to use. How about the temperature of a person entering a building? An infrared thermometer would be best. Finally, how about the weight of a small bag of apples? A kitchen scale would be best because we expect that bag to weigh just a few pounds. Now, let us recap. When measuring length, small distances can be measured with a 30 centimeter ruler. Distances in meters can be measured with a tape measure or a measuring tape, and very long distances in kilometers can be measured using a chunder wheel. When measuring mass, we can use a kitchen scale for things in the kitchen or at the market, and a bathroom scale to weigh ourselves. When measuring temperature, we have many different types of thermometers that we can use. We can use an infrared thermometer to measure someone's body temperature, a room thermometer to measure the temperature of a room, or even a tea thermometer to measure the temperature of our drinks. And finally, when measuring volume and capacity, we can use a medicine cup to measure small volumes, 1 liter jugs to measure volumes in liters, and a measuring beaker to measure volumes in milliliters or liters. We can also use displacement to measure the volume of irregularly shaped objects. It was great to have you here. I hope you enjoyed the session and see you next time.